Today, I will be talking to Helen Loy, who is very active in the advocacy community for better city planning and urbanism, and also is involved in the real estate development industry, which is super interesting to me. And so thank you for joining me today, Helen. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to chat with you, and I'm always in favor of more of these types of conversations and resources.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I would love to know what first captured your interest in urbanism and development, city plan, that kind of stuff. Like, where did this all begin?
Oh man, where do I start? Um, I I grew up in Delta and I've lived in kind of Metro Vancouver since I was 6. So I think most people who've lived here, including people who've come here recently, like housing and affordability is always top of mind. It's just like one of those things that come up at all social events, dinners, and when you meet people, that's kind of what you talk about in addition to the weather. So I think it's always been top of mind, but it probably wasn't until I worked in the industry that I kind of took those next steps into understanding kind of what the reasons are that cause high housing costs or why we have bike lanes in certain places and not in others. Um, so I would say it's always been there and kind of um, the back of my mind, and then really just like working in housing, especially in nonprofit housing, where there's this, I think, this idea that like this is the best type of development, right? Like you have nonprofits, their goals are, really great intentions to provide affordable housing, and yet kind of the catalyst for me was when I was working on a project in South Surrey. It was a really great project. It was a not-for-profit called Unity that was using their own land to redevelop affordable housing and adding density. And the neighborhood just came out and, spoke against it. Council ended up voting it down. And I think for me, that was the catalyst of like, if this is getting voted down and it's like funded by so many different good groups coming together, like BC Housing, the nonprofit putting in money and land, then like something is really, really wrong and more people need to know about this. So
Hmm.
that's kind of what spurred my advocacy and my interest to really dive in a lot deeper.
So, how many years ago was that? Did that happen? That project? Like, what year, roughly? Just to get a
Oh,
timeline, I guess.
I'm really bad with dates.
That's okay.
So that was when I was working for Catalyst and not for profit developer,
Hmm.
and I left them in 2022.
Okay, so
So
fairly recently, then, I guess.
yeah, I would say this happened probably in the last four to 6 years.
Hmm.
Luckily, they did go back to um, council again, and it did get supported with a new council team. It's
Hmm.
basically a block west of 152nd and 20th.
Okay. So you managed to get, did you have a part in finally getting that over the hurdle, or is that after you left?
That was after I left.
Hmm.
Doug Tennant is the CEO of Unity, and I had been involved. I had been supporting Unity in the development of that project up until the first time they went to council, and then shortly after, I had left Catalyst, and then they spent about a year and a half to 2 years, kind of like doing a really big campaign. Yeah, and I think they talked to a lot of counselors, and there was the municipal elections during that time, so they kind of like almost asked counselors to promise, "Hey, we'll support you, like we'll support this project," and whether they believed that that was a good project.
Hmm. Now, yeah, because that's kind of why I'm curious, because you started, if I understand correctly, the BC Urbanism Discord server. That's right.
Yeah.
And that was back, what, 2020 or something like that?
Ooh. Also have really bad memory. I feel like I should have looked this up beforehand.
This is what's so interesting to me, because we do have a very strong, in BC, a very, like, Metro Vancouver as well, like urbanism kind of culture, I guess. We have all
Hmm.
these people who have originated. We've got Ute Lee, we have a whole chat server devoted to better city planning and urbanism. I guess I'm just curious, like how, like what do you think? Why do you think we have this culture here in the wider Vancouver region? Do you think it is just the high house prices, or do you think there's something
Hmm.
else to it?
I mean, and there's strong towns too, and I think you guys have been doing work, and kind of had a group as well, right? And then there's
Yeah.
also Del Pop. Like there's a couple different, and then abundant housing as well, right? So Metro Vancouver has some bits of existing good urbanism, right? You go to the West End, we have some decent bike routes. We have fairly good transit in the Vancouver area, for a North American city. And I think there are enough people that have been exposed to good urbanism that they kind of can understand what the concept is once you kind of go down a rabbit hole of talking about it, right? And then all these other, I think, separate initiatives that you just mentioned, like the Ute Lee channel, like abundant housing, like strong towns being a movement. I feel like they were all kind of happening separately. And I feel like COVID really fueled all of that energy into an online presence, right? Because you had no other option. And so I really for me it all started after that Unity project in South Surrey when I felt like I can't believe nobody knows about this and people aren't coming out and saying why isn't this being built. So I kind of went on Reddit and then subsequently on Twitter, and I think that was when Twitter was less toxic. I mean, Twitter in a way is always going to be a little bit toxic, but I think it was less bad, at least in my own experience. And I started following this group out of Toronto called More Neighbors Toronto. And they had already a Discord server. And I joined it, and I just was so fascinated watching the way that they operate. Um, it was mostly kind of folks that were maybe younger in their late 20s, maybe like up to mid 30s ish. So people who maybe haven't hasn't exactly maybe started like a family or have young kids, but we're quite educated, have a lot of time, very tech savvy. So they were very organized in getting folks to come out, attend meetings, know what's like, post all the different things that were going on about housing projects, and just like speaking up and just being the voice that is like, hey, that's great that there's a group out there that is very vocal about their concerns, but then there's also groups that are here that think that this is a good thing and that housing should be built, or that bike lanes should be put in and whatnot. So I didn't see anything in BC or Greater Vancouver that was doing that. And I had been using Discord personally for video games, and I just felt like that was the platform that was easiest to use in my experience compared to like a Slack or, any of these other
Yeah.
platforms. So that's really what spurred me creating the BC Urbanism Discord. And
Yeah. Yeah, I think like with Discord, it's you think, oh, why would people want to just like sit and chat about it? But it's not. It's mobilizing. It's organizing
yeah.
that kind of a movement, a political movement. So yeah, that's a good point. So once you witnessed, that's a good example. Like you witnessed the YIMBY group in Toronto organizing with it. You're like, oh, we could do, yeah, totally makes sense. That's cool. That's good to know. I always wondered why, because I don't see like any other, like I haven't, at least I haven't seen it come across any other urbanism discords like anywhere. So it's pretty interesting. Like I wonder if we would, like I kind of feel like maybe other places around the world could benefit from having a place to talk about this stuff and mobilize as well. So maybe I don't know if there are any more other than kind of what you
I
talked about.
think, yeah, so Calgary has, I think, more homes. Calgary. I
Mm,
might be saying that name wrong. I know during the last round of municipal elections, Homes for Living Victoria was created, and they are also a Discord community. Obviously,
mm-hmm.
Strong Towns now has a Discord community. I
Yeah,
don't know whether that was intended or related to whether BC Urbanism has this place, but
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on why, you think there's like a sudden
Yeah, I think it's
big
the same as
sprouting.
you. I think as well, like Vancouver is kind of, because what is it called? Like a world, like people always say it's like one of the most livable cities, right?
Right.
And a lot of that is the urban design. The fact that you've got the bike lanes, you've got this amazing seawall that you can get pretty much anywhere downtown on foot, probably, in 10 or 15 minutes just by walking
Hmm.
around. and I think that attracts a lot of people. And then you're like, oh wait, I can't afford to live downtown. But I can live close by. But the close by areas, they're not up to the same. They're not built with the same, I guess, mindset as Vancouver. At least the downtown anyway. They're built with a more car centric idea, or just suburban plan. And I mean, in my case, I'll tell you my story, which was that I lived in Metro Vancouver for a little while, and we went on a trip to, well, I'd be on a couple of trips. Went a trip to Victoria first, and then a trip to Penticton in the Okanagan. And I was like, what is different? Why is Langley not like this? And I looked on side by side on a map at the same
Yeah.
scale, and you see, like in Victoria and in Penticton, there's this very dense grid plan. Everything's close
Yeah.
together. And in Langley, it's got these big, fat arterial roads, and everything's spread out. I was like, I posted on Facebook, why is Langley so poorly planned? Like this. And my friend is like, oh, you haven't heard of like post-war suburban planning before? I'm like, no. And he kind of pointed me in the right direction. This was back in like 2013 or 14, I think. So it was a long time ago, and that's kind of what got me on the path. And I think probably a lot of people are kind of the same way. They're like, why, when I go to downtown, is it so nice and walkable, but then in my own city, I have to use a car to do everything. And yeah, having that kind of beacon absolutely is a part of it for sure. Yeah, so that's cool. It's kind of interesting to learn about that. Um, I guess we can move on to the other subject I wanted to talk to you about as well, which is your involvement in a new development here in Langley near
Mm-hmm.
the Carvolth Bus Loop, which is the Sacred Waters development. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that. So
Sure. Yeah.
more.
So I am on a contract basis with Sacred Waters until the end of August. So it's just about wrapping up, but I feel it's been a really great. I'm very fortunate that I feel very grateful that I had the opportunity to kind of work with the team at Sacred Waters, and um, they just started up about 1 to 2 years ago. They are the economic arm of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations. So, for folks who might not be familiar, those three nations kind of traditionally resided in areas across Richmond, Delta, Surrey, Langley, Maple Ridge, and all the way kind of almost even back up to Squamish in a way. And so Sacred Waters is the three of these nations coming together and finding a way to kind of go and pursue economic opportunities in a collaboration in ways that they maybe could not do or don't have capacity to do individually as nations. So it's very similar to, I guess, MST and some of the work that we're seeing on the Vancouver side. And it's really cool. And the Langley development at 200 and it's 201 and 86 essentially on the
Yeah,
northeast corner. And that is our kind of first development project. It's quite a big one for a first project. It's 4 towers, and it's meant to be hopefully include some rental, possibly some other tenures in the future. We don't know yet until we kind of flesh out the details. But the idea is that this will be Sacred Waters' first go kind of at development. And the way that Sacred Waters wants to approach this project, as well as I think development in general, is just do it in a way that, yes, profit is important, but also the values of creating like a good community is really important. So that might mean, thoughtful design, a little bit more of a robust engagement process, right? Because it's the concept of not just building for now, but a 7 generation view of anything that they do. Really, it's this idea that they want to be sustainable. They want to have responsibility to the community, to the environment, and just do good work and build good communities. And I think Langley is going to be an example of that.
cool. I mean, obviously, you said 4 towers. So how many years
Mhm.
is there, like a phased plan for that, or all going up I assume it's not going all going up at once.
No, so it is going to be a bit of a phased approach. I don't have an exact timeline at this time. I think, again, it's just so early. We're still figuring it out. And
Hmm.
I think also even the clarity around what is phase one is still being figured out, whether it's like one tower, two towers, or whatnot. So it is very, very early stages.
Yeah. And sort of, I guess, thinking about that multi-general, like that kind of long-term thinking approach as well, is like, how will this project differ from maybe a typical, maybe like with the more profit motive kind of mindset?
Mhm.
Like, what has been done to improve the quality of life, maybe residents and people in the area of this project compared to something else?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different factors. I think first of all is the concept of having that cultural awareness baked into the design. Like very early in our design process, there was a very strong kind of initiation of visioning work to bring together leadership from the different nations as well as staff from Sacred Waters to sit down and really go, okay, what does this project mean to us? What does, when we say we want it to be sustainable, when we say we want it to be inclusive and kind of account for different types of households, like what does that mean, right? And I think some developers might do that, maybe not all. I think some developers who might be more for profit focused would more or less do kind of like a market um, sweep and kind of go, okay, what's profitable in the area and be kind of driven by that. Whereas I think what I feel in my experience that Sacred Waters is trying to do is kind of ground our developments in values and have those values kind of reflect not just like what would sell in the market, but like what would I want as an individual who might live in this community, right? So some of those things might result in things like not necessarily doing the unit mix of studios and larger units that would be most marketable, right? Maybe trying to create some larger units because we just feel that that's important to have unit sizes that attract households that are traditionally not served by this type of development, right? It might include things like thinking about the amenity spaces and making sure that they are inclusive and kind of are things that just people actually want to use rather than just throwing in something just to check off a box, right? I don't think it's difficult. I think it's really just changing the focus from thinking about what makes money and then kind of layering in on top of that a desire to make sure that it's things that suit people and families, or even just the question of reflecting back, what would I want if I was living in this community?
Hmm. So it sounds like there's still some kind of final decisions in those areas to kind of make from what you're saying.
We just submitted a rezoning, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago. So usually some of those kind of more concrete details, I would say, come a bit later. But I feel like having worked at a couple different developers now, that intention setting and vision setting piece at the beginning is not very common, I would say. So to me
Mm.
personally, I feel like that already sets the process apart by grounding, your intent at the very beginning.
So when we're looking at the renderings, like those pictures now,
Mhm.
that's just a very kind of general idea. Is that correct?
It is and it isn't. I would say that on that site, it's unfortunately quite limited as to like what
Mm.
you can build if you want enough density. And unfortunately, there's still kind of the basic crux of the equation, which is like you need that density in order to be able to afford to have these trade-offs where you can have larger units or maybe like a better amenity space, right? So I don't think the form and the massing might change too much.
Okay.
Again, I'm not super involved on the project anymore, but that's just my sense of it. But I
Yeah.
do think that a robust engagement process is really important. And it's not just for the local community, but also back to the three nations that Sacred Waters supports, making sure that the nation communities also feel like they are resonating with what Sacred Waters is trying to do on this project. I would say that if we step away from the Langley example, I know there are other projects that we are working on where we don't max out the density because we want to see larger units. Like there are sites we're working on. Unfortunately, I can't disclose because it's confidential location right
That's
now,
okay.
but there's a site we're working on where we're looking at mass timber. Obviously, that costs more in that example, but we're choosing to go down that route because we believe in kind of that innovative technology and we believe in the sustainability impact of using mass timber, right? And on that particular project, we're looking at way more 4 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms than are minimally required, and just having a smaller portion of the maximum density or number of units that we could build because we value the open space and the amenity space that we want to be able to put in, um, right? So some of
Hmm.
those things that you might not see in other developments where they're trying to max out the area that is profitable, I think is where you'll start to see some of the difference.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess it's interesting as well because again, going back to what we talked at the beginning, is your kind of advocacy in this area, and now and you're also involved as well with development. Do you feel like this development is like helping shape the city in the right kind of more urbanist direction?
Yeah, I would say I feel like it's a bit of a one way of my my work day to day gives me some context and information that I can then share with the community and advocacy, as opposed to like the advocacy work driving influence in, my day-to-day work. Um, just in the same way that, in the server, there are folks that work for TransLink or work for Moby that just have like a lot of close experience and knowledge that I wouldn't have because I'm not exposed to those things. So my goal is that by working in this space, be able to share some of that insight or maybe have some more answers when people want to know why is development so expensive, or why does it have to be towers as opposed to townhomes in a certain location, right? That's kind of how I see those two things interacting.
Yeah, I guess I'm also interested in like because Langley is we're kind of on the edge of Metro Vancouver, like with the last one, well, the Maplewood, I suppose, before you get to the big, the Fraser Valley, the big gap, and you got Abbotsford out there. So we're building brand new communities on the edge, and kind of
Hmm.
how do you think the Sacred Wars development, other developments, kind of um, help shape that in a more positive direction? Like, what kind of benefits do they bring to new communities in Langley?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like when you try to add in more density, which obviously more housing, much more housing is needed, it does kind of create this ripple effect that you then ask, well, how are folks gonna get around? That isn't just through lots of cars. So to answer your question kind of in short, I think it helps the community because it's more housing and we need more housing. And then on top
Mm.
of that, it's good housing because it's being developed in a way that I believe is not just about profit, but also this intent to kind of um, become a community and a development. I think it's a benefit because on the net it adds new housing, and then on top of that, I think that the intention and the approach in the way that Sacred Waters is going about building community is good, at least in my experience of working in development. And then if I take another step back and I think about who the developer is and kind of the basis of that work, grounded in this concept of reconciliation, of kind of giving nations back the authority, like the authority and the autonomy to do what benefits them and provides economic prosperity and opportunities for them. That is a benefit to our region and to Langley by having that be possible, having that be done, and kind of setting that example for Langley and for the region. And personally, that I think is a benefit because we need more of that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, something interesting too about the development is I believe it has ground floor retail, right? Or ground floor like
Yes.
stuff at least.
Yeah, yeah. So there's that to part two. Yeah, there'll be added retail. I think there's a bit of a process now to figure out what makes sense for that area, like what that neighborhood needs. I understand maybe there's not necessarily a good food store option in that area. Perhaps again, I don't know the area intimately well, but I wonder, are there places you can walk to, go for lunch, go for coffee? I know most of it is kind of like a business parks in the immediate adjacent area. So that's also something important and adds to the community and the neighborhood by having things that people could just walk to.
Yeah. I'm also curious about the challenge, if there's any challenges faced from kind of, the municipalities' regulation, things like parking minimums,
Hmm.
things like obviously the recent local government, the current council, they've increased the fees that developers have to pay per unit. And I just
Yeah.
wonder if those sort of things have presented any kind of challenges as well,
Oh,
or anything.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Increased fees, increased layering of regulations, like the minimum unit sizes for accessibility is being layered in. I think the Township of Langley also recently council approved a new policy where you need to have a minimum number of 2 and 3 bedrooms, like family size units, which I can't remember if we already meet or not. But there's just like a whole bunch of new regulations and fees coming in that on their own, I think are not things that you would look at separately and be like, oh, this is a bad thing. They're objectively good things, but you layer all of them on and it just further erodes the ability for projects to go through.
Yeah. I mean, I know like the Squamish First Station project, Senecu, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it.
Sanok, yeah.
Canuck, okay. Yes, that one, they were able to bypass those kind of regulations, which was really interesting. Like
Yeah,
they were able to do like I think only parking exists for like half the units, and that makes sense in a
yeah,
kind of, I guess, downtown. But that area of Langley in the future will be quite dense, so maybe
yes.
we should be giving people that option. But I don't know what the regulation is right now. I presume it's at least one stall per unit, correct?
Yeah, so a couple different thoughts on that is Sanok is not in City of Vancouver land.
Hmm. Yeah.
That parcel they're developing on is Squamish Nation land, so they follow a completely different set of policies, like rezoning rules and building permit codes, I believe, don't apply there. And so I think that's part of the reason why. Obviously, it's a completely different context. There's bike lanes there, it's well connected, it's kind of denser. Um, for our site, we are looking at options to look at TDM, like other transportation demand management measures, maybe some added cycling options, maybe some car share. Again, that's the things we can control on our site. We can't control the fact that there's no like bike lane, for example, serving that particular site. So there's a bit of a district or sorry, township of Langley needs to kind of think through what they would like to see in that neighborhood, and that's things that we can't control. And then we are also looking at what can we do in terms of parking, right? So um, I know township doesn't necessarily have a specific policy right now in terms of whether you can have lower parking requirements for rental or even for affordable housing. Um, but I think they're open to some of those
Hmm.
approaches, depending on whether you have some data to support whether this would be feasible. And then it's tricky, like thinking about the long term build out and also kind of like what happens in that area, right? Because, say, for example, if we build it one tower at a time, the last tower might not come on for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Well, maybe the township of Langley could have put in some stuff, or maybe the province might put in some other options that then require a lot less parking than, say, a tower one, right? So
Yeah.
there's just so many things in flux.
Yeah, no, that's true. You can only control so much of just one development in their plan. I mean, again, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the plan for the area. I believe it was supposed to be called Carvolth Transit Village,
Yeah.
and it's kind of, I think, originally it was supposed to be mainly more like mid-rises and townhomes. And we
Mm-hmm.
have started to see more developers coming forward and say we want to build a tower, like towers, and get
Yeah.
that kind of special permission. And so, I mean, how do you feel about that sort of that part of it? Like the fact that we're kind of maybe originally the idea was for that whole area to be low, middle, medium density, but now we're kind of moving into a high density. Is that the way we should be going?
I think that there's no set way. There should be
Hmm.
options, and perhaps doing medium density as a general rule might have been too restrictive, and then it would just result in maybe a lot of sites not being developed because the financial feasibility doesn't work. So then the question then becomes, if that's the case, is it better to just have those sites sit at low density, or the other alternative, which is to consider some higher density forms, which come with things that maybe lower density doesn't, like amenities like a food store, or maybe like, services that you couldn't get in a townhome development. So
Hmm.
I think it's best not to make it too prescriptive and allow some multiple forms, because that whole area being all high rise is obviously not very practical either, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that is actually a problem. That's interesting, your point about the ground floor, because that's a problem we do see in, you're not, you say you're not super familiar, so I guess I want to go too much of a tangent, but in Yorkson, that area that built up in North Langley, just kind of to the east of where this development is, that's all townhomes. That's all a lot of
Hmm.
there are some mid-rises as well, but not much ground floor retail. And I think all the
Yeah,
retail is sort of concentrated in the Willoughby town centre
yeah,
more, and that's detrimental to the area, because if you live like further on the edge, for a lot of people that's just too far to walk to get to anything.
yes,
So I think that's an interesting point, that if you pepper a few, higher, taller buildings in, it becomes more financially feasible to put in the ground floor retail, especially because we have the fire separation requirement, where you can't do a ground floor retail with wood frame. It has to be concrete, right? So
yes,
that can when a building's not too tall, that can really hinder the feasibility, like you said.
yeah,
So that's interesting. I hadn't considered that aspect. Um, yes. So basically, what we've seen, I guess, I also want to talk a little bit about the neighborhood reaction to these kind of developments.
yeah,
This development, it did get posted on, I live in Walnut Grove. It did get posted
yeah,
on the Walnut Grove group, and a lot of people were like, this is
mm,
crazy. We don't have the infrastructure, like the roads and schools, hospitals, this, that, the other thing. I'm going to
right.
show up to the hearing and say no. What would you say to those kind of people who want to obstruct these kind of developments?
Yeah, I have been to quite a few public hearings for projects I've worked on where folks like that show up. And I think there is a little legitimate kind of concern of change in the neighborhood. The general response and approach I use is, I I try to first of all ask, um, if they it depends on the, what that individual kind of looks like, in terms of whether they're older and they look like they're folks that maybe have been in the community for a long time, or maybe they're a young family and they have kids. But generally, I find that most people know family members that have been priced out and can no longer remain in the lower mainland or remain in Langley, or wherever that is. And I try to kind of provide a perspective that is like, this provides housing for maybe someone that couldn't stay in Langley or couldn't stay in Lower Mainland. Um, and that it could be someone that looks like me. It could be someone that, could be like a child, or a somebody that they know. And that this concept of building a little bit more density, because it brings in some of the services that they could then enjoy, trying to appease kind of to that perspective, and kind of trying to show them that this could be a benefit to them directly or to someone they know, right? For example, I think that having another grocer option is always really nice if it's close by and in a distance that they can walk to, if that is something that the neighborhood doesn't already have, right? So I know that when you speak to folks in the neighborhood, you're never going to get them to just completely 180 and be like, oh my gosh, I love this and I support this. But I think trying to connect in areas where they might see some benefit to their personal lives or they might kind of appreciate why the development is being done and perhaps some of the people that might want to live there. Because if they live in a neighborhood and they love it, it's like I'm trying to say more people want to enjoy your neighborhood. Um, and the additional services and the infrastructure can't come if you aren't like if the population is stagnating, right? So that's kind of the other aspect too is people often say there's not enough bus service, there's not enough infrastructure. A lot of that comes through development, right? Like when a development goes up, we pay fees. Those fees go towards upgrading infrastructure. This project, for example, will probably need to upgrade some of the sewer and water lines that are in that vicinity, right? So those things don't come if you don't build things like single family house neighborhoods or townhome development neighborhoods. They just don't kind of come with the upgrades of infrastructure that you normally see with higher density. So hopefully that kind of conversation of shedding some light into the number one, the intent, number two, the possible benefits to them as well as to the future residents would hopefully help them see some aspect of maybe why it's not all bad.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is like people will sometimes they'll live in like a suburban area and they think, oh, it's just fine. Everything's self-sustaining and everything's good. We don't need, but it's not really true. I mean, it's what we talk about strong towns is that often we can become dependent to make up for the lower property tax rates because repairing big roads and things like that is very expensive. So often there's a reliance on expanding the city outward when what we
Yeah.
should be doing is building up the density closer to at least closer to where we already have roads. So we're not building lots of roads and lots of sewer lines and water lines to support outward growth. And I think this development it's close enough to where everything's happening. It's kind of a natural. It's unique in that sense. It's a natural expansion of kind of the Willoughby Warner Grove region. It's not
Mm-hmm.
somewhere out. Say we need we're gonna build a brand new neighborhood. Though they are planning like along the 200th Street corridor, they are planning to kind of grow and expand that way, and we'll see how that goes. Um, yeah, so that's why it kind of interests me as well. I guess one final question I have as well is like we're talking about the ground floor stuff in the building. Do you think it will be possible for someone who works in the grocery store to be able to afford to live in the building above? Or do you think it's
Mm.
going to be priced a little out of reach for those kind of average, working people?
Yeah, that's always a good question. I think that would be ideal if folks who, I mean, that's the whole concept of trying to reduce traffic and car travel. Um, I don't, I admit I don't really know what the average income right now is of someone who might work for a
Mhm.
food store. What I do know is that it is built into our current approach to have a number of units that are a portion below market.
Mhm.
Again, we have targets. I just don't want to speak to them because it's not completely set in stone yet. So
Yeah.
there is going to be a portion of units. I want to say roughly like a quarter at least of the first couple phases or first phase that is going to be slightly below market. And so obviously the intent for those units is to be rented out or leased out at rates that could be affordable to a portion of folks that are at a portion below median incomes. So I
Mhm.
think the question would then be, is that rate then
Mm.
relevant relative to what someone might earn at a food store?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if we build more housing, that drives, the idea is that it will kind of stabilize the prices a little bit. I don't obviously we have a lot to build to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so still helping push us in that direction either way. That's important to remember. I think a lot of people say this won't, people often say that they're not affordable. And yeah, maybe the first few won't be, but if we can't stop somewhere being built because it's, not, maybe is a little bit more expensive, because overall it will eventually, the more we build, the more it will level out prices. In theory, it's supply and demand. Yeah. Yeah, is there anything else you think we haven't talked about that you'd like to share about the development, or just building, like being a developer in Langley, or anything like that?
Um, Not particularly. I mean, I love that Strong Towns is in Langley and kind of doing all that advocacy and education work. It's so important. It's really nice to see, for example, that you had counselors like Michael Pratt, is that his name,
Yeah.
kind of chatting with you. So that's really positive to see. Um, I guess I wish that more people who maybe grew up or currently live in Langley could experience some of the benefits of a denser community or neighborhood. I don't know how that happens. I don't know if there's like I know abundant housing, for example, does like walking tours and stuff. I don't know if that's something that Strong Towns does, but as someone who I feel incredibly lucky to live in, the neighborhood of Olympic Village, I really do like walk, cycle, and transit everywhere. Like I maybe drive for something. I drive to Langley actually for work meetings, every, once every 3 or 4 weeks. But um, it is a lifestyle change, but there are a lot of benefits to it that I didn't think were real growing up in Delta in a suburban neighborhood where my family lived, in a single family house, and my automatic assumption was to just drive everywhere. So I just hope that folks continue to be open to kind of the concept of denser communities, and that hopefully in some areas where it makes sense, like you said in Langley, to be able to build up a bit more of that density, that can be done, and so that people can kind of enjoy some of those benefits of being able to walk and just transit and cycle places.
Yeah, and obviously the location is really great. It's right near, as mentioned, it's right near the Carvolth Bus Exchange, which
Hmm.
offers that express bus, the 555 bus that goes straight to
Right.
Lougheed. I've taken that bus. I take that bus from time to time, maybe not as often as I wish I did, but it's a really good connector. And
Yeah.
so, people are going to hopefully be able to live in this building as well as the other taller buildings around, and commute to work
Hmm.
by bus. And maybe eventually we'll even see that we'll get some rapid, there's the rapid transit connection. There's the planned BRT, which will go from there
Yes.
to the
Yeah.
SkyTrain downtown that's coming. So yeah, it's quite exciting, and yeah, we can bring that density and walkable, more walkable urban environment, hopefully around there. And yeah, well, thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to learning more as the project progresses and seeing news on it. I think it's great. Thank you.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good chat.
Yeah,
And Sacred Waters is building out a website right now, so hopefully it'll come live in the fall, and then we'll be able to share more regular updates on there.